And we're out in a field up in the central part of the state that was planted about 3 weeks ago. And in a good year, you would hope that 3 weeks after planting, we'd be able to look out across this landscape and very easily see the young corn plants. But today, you got to look pretty hard in some places to see anything emerging. And it's been a result of a combination of cold weather over the past 3 weeks, and maybe more so, an awful lot of rain and frequent rains that have come over the last 3 weeks since planting. This field was planted maybe only a couple of days before all that rain started, so it didn't get much of a chance at germination before the soils likely became saturated throughout most of this field. And so the farmer rotary hoed this field yesterday, and we're here today to help assess what the recovery options are. And so I want to talk a little bit about what we're seeing, some of the kinds of factors that play into this decision on whether this farmer keeps the field or whether he decides to replant some or all of it. This area of the row really didn't get a lot of action from the rotary hoe. It threw a few clods up, but it mostly just sort of left big pock marks in this area of row. And that's certainly reflective of the fact that this surface crust really set up in a serious way. And so there are other areas of the field where the rotary hoe did a lot more, was a lot more effective. But even here we see a few seedlings that I'm guessing were probably barely emerged yesterday when they ran the field. And I think over the course of another day or two, it's going to become a lot more evident what kind of effective population that they have in the field. This is a fairly healthy seedling. The mesocotyl between the crown and the seed is nice and white. The coleoptile and the first leaf are reasonably healthy. The kernel itself is firm. It's not mushy like it sometimes gets as it begins to decompose. The one thing that does show on this seedling, though, is the radical root, which is right there, has simply stopped developing. It doesn't look like insect injury. I don't believe it's disease. What I suspect is that it's probably some combination of excessive soil moisture, in other words, saturated soils, and the cold soil temperatures that this field experienced over the last 3 weeks. This much development of these side roots or adventitious roots is simply not normal on a seedling of this age. And they developed because the root tip or the growing point of the radical root was damaged by something. And I suspect, again, it's a combination of too much soil moisture and cold. The crown of the seedling, as well as the mesocotyl right below the crown, is a little fatter than it ought to be. It's swollen, and that's often a symptom of coleoptile that's been impeded by a dense surface crust as it's trying to elongate to the surface. It's a good example of what we call a cold shock injury to the developing seedling. And it may be a little hard to see, but right near the crown at the beginning of what's supposed to be the coleoptile, that tissue is simply dead. It's not diseased, and it's not the result of insect feeding, but I think this is simply indicative of not lethal cold temperatures, but cold temperatures enough that it shocks the metabolic system of this young seedling and simply just stops it in its place. So while technically that seedling is alive, it's certainly not going to mount to anything. The other thing I worry about over the next week or so is fields like this that have been in the ground for 3 weeks, some of them approaching 4. The fungicidal seed treatment is beginning to deteriorate, and in fact may be totally deteriorated by now. And there are still opportunities then on these young seedlings to be infected by seedling blight diseases. And so a field that emerges fine, say over the next couple of days under these conditions, and maybe it looks good at that point, there's still a chance in another week that seedling diseases could really take a big toll and eliminate a lot of these young plants that have survived. Well, we've been out in this field now for probably an hour or so, and you know, my initial thoughts were, from the area of the field we were walking, was that it maybe didn't deserve replanting. As I've walked more this way in the field, I'm simply seeing more and more areas that are not yet emerging. The seedlings are looking a little rough. The radical roots seem to be either dead or dying. The dilemma that a farmer faces is you see parts of the field that are coming up just fine, and so you really don't want to replant those. And then as you walk farther and farther out, you just sort of realize that, well, this is much more extensive than you thought. So it's a bit of a risk to come in here and replant. But given what I'm seeing now over more of the field, I'm thinking that may well, in fact, become the decision for this particular grower.